Hey everyone, welcome back to English Inside Out. Today's episode is a little different. It's not just about grammar or vocabulary or pronunciation. It's about something deeper. Something that actually changes the way you communicate, not only in English, but in life. Today we're talking about calm, but not just any kind of calm. We're talking about the kind of calm that stays steady, even when everything around you is trying to pull you into chaos.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting topic, because calm is often misunderstood. A lot of people see calm and immediately think, weak, passive, not confident. But in reality, calm can be one of the strongest things you can bring into a situation.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Sometimes, when you stay calm, it actually makes other people uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that might sound strange at first, because you would expect calm to make things easier, more relaxed, more peaceful. But in certain situations, it does the opposite.
Let's imagine a moment. Someone is speaking loudly. Maybe they're frustrated. Maybe they're trying to get a reaction from you. And instead of reacting the same way, you stay calm. You don't raise your voice. You don't rush your words. You just stay steady. And suddenly, the energy of the situation changes.
Yeah, and that's where things get interesting, because the other person was expecting something. They were expecting you to react, to match their energy, to join the chaos. And when you don't, it breaks that expectation. So in today's episode, we're going to explore why that happens, why calm is often mistaken for weakness, why it can make people uncomfortable, and why, in the long run, calm is actually a form of strength.
And as always, while we talk about this, you'll also be hearing natural English, real expressions, real sentence flow, the kind of English people actually use in conversations. Because this topic also connects directly to learning English. A lot of learners feel pressure to speak fast, to respond quickly, to sound confident all the time. And when they slow down, when they pause, when they speak more calmly, they sometimes feel like they sound weaker.
Yeah, but often, that calm actually makes you sound more thoughtful, more controlled, and in many cases, more confident. All right, so let's start with the first big idea. So, one of the main reasons calm is misunderstood is because calm is quiet. It doesn't try to show itself. It doesn't try to impress people. It doesn't try to take control of the room in an obvious way.
Yeah. And that's very different from what people usually associate with strength. Because when people think of someone strong, they often imagine someone who speaks loudly, who reacts quickly, who shows strong emotion. So people often confuse visibility with strength. If something is loud, if it's intense, if it's dramatic, it feels powerful.
Exactly. But calm doesn't work like that. Calm doesn't perform. It just stays steady. Imagine two people in a difficult conversation. One person is reacting emotionally, talking fast, interrupting, raising their voice, and the other person is calm, speaking slowly, choosing their words carefully, not reacting to every emotion in the room. Which one looks stronger at first?
Most people will say the first one. Because that energy is more visible. But if you stay in that moment a little longer, you start to notice something different. The calm person is actually in control. They're not being pulled by the situation. They're choosing how to respond, not just reacting.
Yeah, and that's a completely different kind of strength. It's not loud, but it's very real. I like to think of it like this. A very strong structure doesn't move much. It doesn't shake easily. It doesn't react to every small pressure.
Yeah. And from far away, that stillness can look like weakness. But up close, it's actually stability. And I think this connects really well with English learners too. Because sometimes, when you speak more slowly, when you pause to think, when you choose your words carefully, you might feel like you sound less confident.
Yeah, but the opposite is often true. That calm can make you sound more controlled, more thoughtful, and actually more natural.
So maybe the problem is not calm itself, but how quickly people judge it.
Exactly. Calm is quiet, and quiet things are often misunderstood. All right, so once calm is misunderstood, something else starts to happen.
Yeah, and this is where things get really interesting.
All right, so now that we understand why calm can look like weakness, let's go one step further. Because something else starts to happen after that. And this is where things become a bit more psychological. Sometimes when you stay calm, you don't just look different, you disrupt the situation.
Yeah, and I think this is something a lot of people have experienced, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. There are moments where someone expects a reaction from you. They expect you to get defensive, to explain yourself quickly, to get emotional. And when you don't, there's this strange tension in the air. Because in many interactions, there's an invisible script, a pattern that people are used to. If someone speaks aggressively, the other person usually reacts emotionally. If someone criticizes, the other person defends themselves.
Yeah, it becomes almost automatic, like a predictable exchange of energy. Let's imagine a situation. Someone says something a bit rude to you. Maybe they're trying to provoke you, or maybe they're just frustrated. Normally, what happens next?
You react. You defend yourself. You explain. You raise your tone a little, even if you don't want to. But now imagine something different. You hear the same comment, but instead of reacting immediately, you pause, you stay calm, and you respond slowly. Or maybe you don't react at all. And suddenly, the whole situation feels different.
Yeah, and that's because the script is broken. The other person was expecting a reaction, and now they don't know what to do with your calm. And this is the key idea here. Calm removes predictability. When you react emotionally, people understand the situation. They know how to respond. They feel in control.
But when you stay calm, that control disappears because your reaction is no longer predictable. But when you stay calm, that control disappears because your reaction is no longer predictable.
Yeah, especially if someone is used to controlling conversations through emotion. If they raise their voice and you stay calm, if they try to provoke you and you don't react, they suddenly feel uncertain. And we often describe that feeling as unsettled. It's that moment where someone feels slightly uncomfortable, a bit unsure, like something is off, but they don't know exactly what.
Let's imagine this. Someone says, "Why didn't you do this properly?" And instead of reacting emotionally, you say calmly, "Let's look at what happened." That changes everything.
Yeah, because now the energy doesn't escalate. It just stops growing. I like to think of it like this. Imagine someone throws energy at you, like throwing a ball hard. They expect it to come back. But if you stay calm, it's like the ball just keeps going. There's nothing to bounce off.
Yeah, and that's a really powerful image. Because calm doesn't fight the energy. It just refuses to continue it. Calm doesn't feed the situation.
It lets the situation stop by itself.
And this is something really important for English learners too. Because a lot of learners panic when something goes wrong in a conversation, when they forget a word, when they make a mistake, when someone doesn't understand them. And that panic creates pressure. And the conversation becomes harder.
Yeah, but when you stay calm, when you slow down, when you continue without reacting emotionally, the conversation feels completely different. So calm is not just about emotions. It actually changes how interactions work.
Yeah, it changes the energy, the rhythm, and the direction of the conversation.
All right, so now we've seen how calm affects other people.
But there's something just as important, maybe even more important.
Yeah, because calm doesn't just change the situation.
It changes what happens inside you.
All right, so now let's shift the focus a little bit. Because until now, we've been talking about how calm affects other people, how it changes the energy of a conversation, how it can make situations feel different, even uncomfortable. But there's another side to this. And honestly, I think it's even more important. What calm does inside you.
Yeah. And this is where things become very real. Because most difficult situations are not just about what's happening outside. They're about what's happening inside your mind. The pressure, the noise, the urgency. That feeling that you need to react quickly. Anna, when you're under pressure, your mind doesn't stay calm and clear. It becomes faster, but not better. It becomes louder, but not more accurate.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, because a lot of people think that reacting quickly means reacting well. But often, fast reactions are emotional reactions, not thoughtful ones. Let's imagine a situation. You're in a conversation. Something unexpected happens. Maybe someone says something that annoys you, or challenges you, or makes you uncomfortable. What happens inside your mind?
Everything speeds up. You start thinking too many things at once. You try to respond quickly. You feel pressure to say something immediately. And suddenly, your words don't come out the way you wanted. And this is the key idea. Pressure creates noise, and that noise makes it harder to think clearly.
Exactly. It's not that you don't know what to say. It's that your mind is too busy reacting to organize your thoughts. Now, what does calm do in that situation? Calm creates space. Even if it's just a few seconds, it gives your mind a moment to slow down, to organize, to choose.
So instead of reacting immediately, you pause, you breathe, you think for a second, and then you respond. And that small pause changes everything.
I like to think of it like this. Imagine your mind as a room. When pressure enters, it fills the room with noise. Everything becomes messy. You can't find anything. But calm opens the window. It lets the noise settle. And suddenly, you can see clearly again.
And this is where we use a word like clarity. Clarity means being able to think clearly, to understand what's really happening, and to respond in a way that makes sense.
Let's look at two situations. Without calm, you speak too fast, you explain too much, you say things you didn't really mean.
With calm, you pause, you choose your words, you stay in control of what you say. So calm doesn't remove pressure, but it stops pressure from taking control.
Yeah, it keeps your mind available to you, and that's a really powerful thing.
And this is especially important when you're speaking English, because a lot of learners think their problem is vocabulary, or grammar, or pronunciation. But very often, the real problem is pressure.
Yeah, you actually know more than you think. But when you panic, your mind goes blank. You forget words. You lose your structure. Your English didn't disappear. Pressure arrived first.
So imagine you're speaking English, and you forget a word. If you panic, everything becomes harder. You freeze, you stop, you lose confidence.
But if you stay calm, you pause, you rephrase, you continue, and the conversation keeps going.
So calm doesn't just help you communicate better.
It helps you access what you already know. All right, so now we've seen how calm protects your thinking.
But there's one more thing it protects, and this one is very important.
Yeah, because sometimes the biggest problem is not the situation.
It's what you do in that moment.
All right, so now let's talk about something that people don't always think about in the moment, but almost always feel later. Because in many situations, the real impact is not just what happens, it's how you remember yourself in that moment.
Yeah. And I think this is something everyone can relate to. There are moments where you react quickly, you say something emotionally, and maybe in that moment, it feels right. It feels justified. But later, you think about it again, and it doesn't feel the same. So here's the idea. Calm doesn't just protect the situation. It protects you.
Yeah, it protects how you feel about yourself after everything is over. Because sometimes, the hardest part is not the moment itself. It's the memory of how you handled it. Let's imagine a situation. You're in a difficult conversation. Maybe someone says something unfair, or disrespectful, or frustrating, and you react immediately. You raise your voice. You say something sharp. You match their energy.
And again, in that moment, it might feel like you're defending yourself, like you're taking control, like you're not letting the situation win. But later, when you think about it, you might feel something different. Maybe you think, I shouldn't have said that. I could have handled that better. That wasn't really me.
And that's where this idea comes in. Dignity. Dignity is that sense of self-respect, the feeling that you handled yourself well, even when the situation was difficult. Now, imagine the same situation, but this time, you stay calm. You don't react immediately. You take a second. You choose your words, or maybe you decide not to respond at all.
And later, when you think about that moment, it feels different. Even if the situation wasn't perfect, even if it was still uncomfortable, you feel okay with yourself because you didn't lose control. You didn't become someone you don't recognize. You stayed yourself.
A strong reaction can feel powerful for a minute. Dignity feels better later, and I think this is something people only really understand through experience, because it's not obvious in the moment. In the moment, emotion feels urgent. It feels necessary. It feels like you have to respond now.
But calm gives you something different. It gives you a small space between what you feel and what you choose to do. And that's where we use a word like restraint. Restraint means holding yourself back, not reacting immediately, even when you feel like reacting.
For example, it took a lot of restraint not to respond emotionally. And that's not weakness. That's control. That's awareness. That's strength in a different form.
And this is also very important for English learners, because sometimes when you make a mistake or someone doesn't understand you, you feel embarrassed. And that embarrassment can make you react. You start apologizing too much. You lose confidence. You stop speaking.
Yeah. But when you stay calm, you don't let that moment define you. You keep speaking. You keep your presence. You keep your dignity. You don't need perfect English to speak with dignity.
So calm doesn't mean you don't feel anything.
It means you don't let the moment take you away from yourself, all right? So now we've seen how calm affects the situation,
How it affects your thinking.
and how it affects how you feel about yourself later.
So now let's talk about something really important.
Yeah, because there's a common misunderstanding we need to clear up. All right, so before we move toward the end of this episode, there's something really important we need to clarify. Because when people hear all of this, they sometimes misunderstand what we mean by calm.
Yeah. And this is a very important distinction. Being calm is not the same as being cold, and it's not the same as shutting down emotionally. Because from the outside, these things can look similar. A person is quiet, they're not reacting, they're not showing strong emotion, but what's happening inside can be completely different. Let's start with something called suppression. Suppression is when you push your emotions down. You don't deal with them, you don't process them, you just hide them.
Yeah, and that can look calm on the outside, but inside, everything is still there. It's just building up, quietly, but continuously. So imagine someone says something that hurts you, and instead of responding, you just ignore it. You pretend it didn't affect you. You push it down. That's not calm. That's suppression.
Yeah. And the problem with suppression is that it doesn't remove the emotion. It just delays it. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They wait.
Now let's look at something else. Numbness. When someone feels numb, they're not calm. They're disconnected.
Yeah, they're not really feeling what's happening. They're kind of distant from their own emotions. So instead of saying, I feel hurt, but I'm staying calm, it becomes, I don't feel anything.
And that's a big difference, because calm is presence. Numbness is absence.
Now let's talk about real calm, because real calm still feels. It still notices. It still cares. The difference is, it doesn't let emotion take control.
So, in a difficult situation, a calm person might still feel hurt, frustrated, uncomfortable. But instead of reacting immediately, they stay present. They choose how to respond. So calm is not about having no emotion. It's about not being controlled by emotions.
And that's where something very important comes in: self-regulation. Self-regulation means managing your emotional reactions in a healthy way. So instead of reacting instantly, you pause, you breathe, you notice what you're feeling, and then you decide what to do. You don't give the moment your first reaction. You give it your best one.
And I think this is really important, because the goal is not to become cold or distant or emotionless. The goal is to become steady.
Yeah, steady is such a good word. It feels human. It feels balanced. It feels real. It's like holding a glass of water. Even if the room moves a little, the water doesn't spill everywhere.
And again, this connects directly to English, because speaking calmly doesn't mean you're not nervous or you're not making mistakes. It means you keep speaking even when you are nervous.
So calm is not about becoming less human.
It's about becoming more stable, more present, and more in control of how you show up. All right? So, now that we've seen all of this,
Let's bring everything together and close this episode in a simple, practical way.
all right. So before we finish, let's just take a moment to step back and look at everything we talked about today. Because this wasn't just about communication. It wasn't just about English. It was about something deeper, how you carry yourself in difficult moments.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those topics where the more you think about it, the more you start to notice it in your own life. In conversations, in reactions, in the way people respond to pressure. So let's bring it all together in a very simple way. Calm is often misunderstood as weakness, but in reality, it's a form of control. It changes the energy of a situation. It protects your thinking, and it protects how you feel about yourself later.
Yeah, and maybe the most important idea is this. Calm doesn't remove the moment. It changes how you move through it. Because difficult moments will always exist. People will still be emotional. Situations will still feel intense. Pressure will still be there. But the real question becomes, who do you become inside that moment?
Yeah, because you don't always control what happens. But you do have some control over how you respond. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not react the way the moment is asking you to.
And this applies directly to English too. Because a lot of learners think confidence comes from speaking fast, or speaking perfectly, or never making mistakes. But often, confidence comes from something much simpler, staying calm, even when things are not perfect.
Yeah, because when you stay calm, you keep going. You don't freeze. You don't disappear from the conversation. Calm English is not perfect English, it's steady English.
And I think that's a really powerful goal. Not to become perfect overnight, but to become someone who can stay steady, even when things feel messy.
Yeah, because in the end, people may not remember your exact words, but they remember how you made them feel. And they remember the energy you brought into the moment. So here's something we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stayed calm in a situation where the old you would have reacted differently?
Yeah. And how did that feel? Did it change the situation? Did it change how you felt after?
Share your experience with us, because your story might help someone else today.
All right, that's it for today. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye, guys.